Hey, what's good everyone? I'm Torn. Thank you for joining me in my bedroom studio. Today we're going to be breaking down my new track Grim that just came out on all streaming platforms. If you haven't heard it yet, you can check it out at the link in the description. Let's dive in. Alright, so we got the full project here in FL Studio, and as you can see at the top, I've kind of laid out the song structure. At the very beginning you have the intro, we have the first theme, goes into a breakdown, and then we have a build, goes into the first drop, a second little build, and then there's the second drop. And then the second half is a little bit different. There's a little bit of a breakdown. We go into the second theme, which is quite similar to the first theme, a little bit of variation. And then instead of going into another breakdown, we go right into the build from the theme and then into the final drop, which doesn't have this little second build in the middle. It is actually just a longer kind of extended drop rather than two smaller drops. So let's just kind of break it down chronologically and kind of go through things as they progress. So going over to the intro here, we just kind of start out with some simple kind of like sound effects, some white noise, and a little bit of a melody here with the lead. A little bit of a spooky lead there, and what that actually is an organ. So where is that? I'm gonna bring that up. I'm gonna bring it up, and it's actually using Kontakt, Complete Control. I use the Kontakt libraries for a lot of my orchestral sounds because they just sound so nice and they're so it's just wonderful. It's a great library. So by itself, it kind of sounds like this without any effects. Let me just turn all those off. But then we add some effects and it gets all moody. Ooh, spooky. So after this intro section, we move into the first theme, or the first verse, which is an orchestral section, and there's quite a bit going on here, so I'm gonna move through it relatively quickly, but let's just kind of go down the list and look at all these different layers we have. So to start out, we have the brass, and it sounds like this. Sounding very sinister. On top of that, following a very kind of similar progression, we have a choir. Now up next, because we're stacking the layers to try and get that big symphonic sound, we're gonna add the organ in as well, following the same kind of progression. Sounds like this. A little bit of a variation. We have the sub actually following, so the sub is doing the exact same chord progression as well. You may not even be able to hear it, let's see. Again, we have the cello following the same progression. And I really like adding that one in there because it has that tremolo and it gives it that really nice kind of texture that none of the other sounds are adding to it. Now, next up, following a similar kind of chord progression, but different in terms of the articulation, we have the string section. And the strings are just kind of going like this. This is what the MIDI looks like. And now to add the finishing touch to the orchestral section is the arp, which kind of helps add this cool little movement, this plucky little sound all throughout, a little bit of a sprinkle and sparkle, and that sounds like this. Finally, if we play all of those orchestral elements together, you get this. Now there are a couple other little things we want in these theme sections to kind of add a little bit more texture and dynamic. And those are essentially just kind of noise, white noise elements, and ear candy. I've also got a little bit of a vocal effect in there, and it's just really simple and kind of breathy and airy, and it sounds like this. Just really simple, really subtle, but it kind of adds a little bit of texture. Alright, so that pretty much sums up the first theme section. Now we're going to move into the breakdown section. So the breakdown sounds like this. So you've already seen the brass, and that's just in there. It's holding one note. Nothing too crazy. We have a sub bass going on in here, and we also have just kind of a kick hitting. We also have this little perk that's kind of building in, a percussive instrument. Let me show you what that sounds like. And the cool thing about that percussive instrument is that it's actually going to go and continue on in throughout the build all the way up until the drop. So it's going to kind of become part of the build as well. Now, as we move down the breakdown section here, we have a few kind of just cymbals and simple things like that. The brass once again. And then we get down to the actual sound design section. And I think I might have bounced that. No, I actually have that still in MIDI here. So let's take a look at what that actually sounds like. So I'm just going to isolate the actual bass here. Let's do the whole subsection here. And as you can see, there's a ton of automation going on for this thing. I've got some different automation going on to kind of modulate the bass and change the sound. It's a serum patch, and I can show you a little bit about it in a second. But then I'm also actually automating the panning, so it's moving from left to right and kind of messing with your head a little bit. Also, one plugin I really like to use for kind of like reverb throws and cool effects is this plugin by Data Life called Endless Smile. And essentially one knob, and it has a handful of different built-in filters that you can pick between. Right now I've just got set on the first one. So when you check out the automation, when it's fully wet here, it's gonna sound like it's very pushed to the back and in the distance. But then as we kind of like turn down that effect, it's gonna bring the dryness back in, and it's gonna bring it back into the foreground. Right? Next up in this breakdown section, we essentially just have a whole bunch of effects, and I'm not going to go too far into these because most of these are just risers and samples and noise and stuff like that. But one cool little thing that I have in here that's kind of adds a nice texture is this chain sound, and what that sounds like is this. It just adds a kind of nice little metallic kind of clicking in the background. So altogether, the effects section just sounds like this. And I just really love creating those kind of moods and atmospheres using just simple sounds like that. You don't really need any kind of melodies or crazy sound design, just air and space and ambience. Now next up is the build section, and it's kind of fun because we take that bass synth that we just had in the breakdown and it kind of carries over into the build, and then it increases in rate and becomes faster and faster and faster until we hit the drop. But then also we're adding in all of those other orchestral elements again as they come in with kind of a fresh new melody. So let's hear what that sounds like. So I'm not going to dive too much into all of these elements here because we've kind of already touched on them. They're just, it's in a different variation essentially. The one thing I am going to highlight again is just that bass sound because I think it's kind of cool how it flows from the breakdown into the build here. So let's dive into this bass patch a little bit and just kind of see what's going on. Really all that I'm automating for the actual patch itself is the rate, and you can see that here with the macro. It's attached to the rate on LFO number 1. LFO number 1 is just linked to a bunch of different things here that's kind of creating the sound, but at its lowest rate it sounds like this. We can increase that rate, or we can make it really fast. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, essentially what I'm doing here is automating it, and it's just increasing in speed as we're doing other automation in the mixer channel, like panning and stuff like that. So it kind of sounds like this as we move into the build section. And once again, I'm using Endless Smile to kind of lift that out and take out some of that low end. Now, as we hit the second half of the build here, that's when I start to introduce the main bass synth from the drop. And you can kind of hear that coming in the distance. It's reverbed out, it's low passed, and it sounds a bit like this. I'm gonna quickly go over the drums just real quick for this build. Not gonna go too deep into them, but check it out. Here we got the drums. Quite simple. We got that percussive element in the background. As we move ahead here, it's a really simple build, but we start bringing in the snare, and then eventually it picks up double time, and we start kind of filtering things out as we reach the end of the build. Alright, so now the moment you've all been waiting for, the drop. It's actually relatively simple. There's not too much going on, but every sound kind of just plays a key role and has its spot. So it kind of all works together like a machine. So the main lead sound that you've heard, and we kind of got a bit of that earlier, it kind of sounds like this. So this is what the Serum Patch looks like. I'll let you kind of check that out. One of the cool things that I want to point out here is the portamento, and that's something I like to use in a lot of my leads, and that's what essentially gives the sound that slide or that movement from, or the pitch bend from one note to another when you're moving, say, from a high note to a low note. It kind of slides and bends rather than just jumping right to it. That lead is kind of the main focus, but there's actually so much going on in the background in terms of synth work and what's kind of keeping that groove actually moving. So here, let's take a look at the individual basses. So to start off, we have this Serum Patch that I made that's absolutely just destructive and obtrusive. I call it Metal Slam, and essentially what it is that big metallic hit, and then it actually changes and slides up into the high-pitched sustain that you hear. So check it out. And then what I meant by that and how it transitions into the sustain is that if we actually go further on the drop, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, you can see that if you hold on to it, it just sustains on that high note, and it's just disgusting. Gross. So up next, there are a few different other little elements. We have this one little squeak that's pretty much present throughout all the drops. It sounds like this. Next up, another Serum Patch. It sounds like this. And then I've got this little reverse kind of growl. Alright, now I'm going to play all of those other elements without the lead bass synth, and I'm going to bring the drums back in. This is kind of what it sounds like. At the end of the phrase where the main bass synth kind of like trails off, once again, that's just Endless Smile, and it kind of sounds like this. And that's all just to throw the sound and then bring it back, because that creates more contrast and just makes things overall more interesting. So then after that first drop, we move into another build section. I won't go too into it because we kind of talked about the build already, and this is what it sounds like. And then we hit the second drop. Now the second drop is kind of fun, and I think a lot of people have kind of gone for that cascading melody that just kind of like rises because it has so much energy. And I also, instead of kind of making the sub bass move along with the bass synth, we switch over to more of a hip hop trap-esque kind of sub bass where it's just kind of like a lazy sub where we just lay it down, and like an 808 almost. So I'm just going to quickly go through it without the bass synth. This is essentially what it sounds like. I'm not going to go too into detail to everything here. Little sub drop. And now, this is where it gets interesting, because in the second half of the second drop is where we actually have a bit of a switch, and I switched the drums up. Instead of going with trap hip-hop style drums, we move over to actually rhythm drums. The sub bass is very simple in that section, as you can see, and here it's just hitting straight on the half notes there. And then if we check out what's going on with the bass synth work again, we can see this is what it sounds like. And the main difference with this section is we have that kind of sustained bass going, which I showed you before. And then we trail off into the breakdown. Alright, so the second theme section is pretty much the same as the first theme section, except that there's just variations in the MIDI and the writing. I'm not gonna go too far into it because we went over the first one, but this is what it sounds like. And then the difference this time around is rather than going into a breakdown, we go right from the second theme into the build. And that build is pretty much identical as the first one, so we won't even go into it at all. But then we hit the last drop, which is just like... So my goal with the second drop was really just to go all in with the sounds and just throw them all at you and just really make things explosive, you know what I'm saying? So it sounds like there's a lot going on, but really it's following a very similar formula to the previous drops. The only real difference is we have this really, really thick, low sustain happening, and that kind of sounds like this. Ugh, just dirty. Gross. And then on top of that bass synth and the rest of the bass synth layers, we just have that main lead melody synth, and that kind of sounds like this. I'm just trying to find as many different ways and variations to use these basses as I can. So really what I've done in terms of like the writing, I'll really explore the piano roll and move things up and down octaves. And once again, remember I have that portamento, so things are kind of sliding and it creates that cool effect. So that's kind of how I approach writing these drops. It's very similar to the first and second drop. We just have all these kind of sporadic sounds that all kind of come together to create this overall groove that keeps things moving. Now, finally, as we get to the second half of the final drop, there is one last switch. And my goal with this was kind of like, you hit that last drop and you're like, holy crap, this is it. But then it goes further. And it's like, what? And boom, there you have it. That's the full track Grim. Alrighty, thank you all so much for stopping by. I hope you all enjoyed that track breakdown of my new single Grim, which is out on all streaming platforms. If you haven't heard it yet, hit that link in the description to go check it out. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it. And also, leave a comment down below. And I just want to say hi to whoever's still around, because I haven't posted a video in ages, so it'd be cool to see who's, yeah, still there. Peace.